Hello, everyone. I'm Ajay Sharma. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Educational Theory and Practice at the University of Georgia. Uh, and my research centers on theoretical and ethnographic explorations of neoliberalism's impact on education and also ethical implications of teaching and learning in the Anthropocene. I'm also engaged with the science curriculum and professional development work in my native land, and that's India. So I'm delighted to have this wonderful opportunity to work with you on what I'm calling the wicked problems of teaching and learning science in this strange new world uh, that has never-ending ecological and humanitarian disasters, uh, and this new epoch has been labeled as Anthropocene or Capitalocene in literature. And in our work during the institute, it will be my effort to explore with you and make a case for teaching and learning of what I call phonetic science in schools to cope with the challenges of this new age. And in this presentation, I'm going to cover some of the major themes uh, that deal with uh, wicked problems, neoliberalism, and globalization in the context of science education. So let's start with exploring the notion of wicked problems. All right. So uh, you may have heard, and I'll start with a small case that oftentimes it has been argued that if you want to protect forests, then if we can put a monetary value to them, then we can do a better job conserving forests. Because if protecting those lands mean this some monetary rewards would come to the community that is in charge of protecting them, or to the owners, then they would have more uh, financial incentives to protect the forest. And then, in fact, there are a lot of corporations that do this kind of protection. They to many times to offset their carbon output, they agree to pay some community that has ownership of some forest uh, to to protect the land, the forested land, under their management or supervision, or land that traditionally belonged to them. So let me share with you something that happened in Costa Rica a couple of years back. Uh, so what happened was that there was a coffee plantation, and this coffee plantation had a couple of forest lands adjoining the coffee plantation, and uh, what the coffee plantation owner was well aware of was that these forest land adjoining the plantation were actually very good for the coffee crop, because the forest bees from the forest were pollinating the coffee plants. And if these bees did not do this important work, then he would have had to rent beehives to pollinate his crop. So these bees were saving him approximately $60,000 every year. So an eco-service payment contract was agreed upon between the plantation owner and the owner of the forest that adjoined the coffee plantation. The coffee plantation owner agreed to pay some amount of money every year, uh, and the forest owner agreed not to cut his forests. And so it was. So the question is this a win-win scenario or not? You see, I mean, the coffee plantation owner is saving money because he doesn't have to rent beehives, and the forest owner is getting money just for not cutting down the trees. So on the face of it, it looks like what can go wrong here? It's a win-win scenario. Everybody wins, right? Well, what had really happened was a bit unexpected because after some time had lapsed, the prices of coffee crashed on global commodity markets. As a result, the plantation owner, uh, it didn't make sense for him to grow coffee anymore. So he switched from growing coffee to growing pineapples. Now, pineapple plants do not need bees for pollination. In fact, if pollution happens, then seeds negatively affect the quality of the fruit. And the presence of seeds means that the fruit cannot be exported to US market. And so, according to the logic of our ecosystem service valuation, the monetary value of the forest adjoining the plantation dropped from $60,000 every year to zero. In fact, one can say that it became negative in the sense because uh, the, the forests were home not only to bees but also hummingbirds and bats, which were harmful to the pineapple crop. So, so the contract ended. The coffee plantation owner stopped paying the forest landowner, and now the forest landowner, who had been earning money every year just for having the trees uh, stand on those lands, he lost revenue, and so guess what happened? He cut off the trees and because uh, he wanted to have money coming from that land, and once that revenue stream was dried up, he cut off the forest. And this is not an isolated case. This is happening this to forests surrounding all pineapple plantation in Costa Rica. So uh, it's evident that, I mean, we often go after simple solutions, uh, but simple solutions often do not work in solving most problems facing this planet. Uh, you can imagine, I mean, it's very easy to get broad public support for policies that are actually not so good for the environment or for even solving the problem. Uh, but why? Why these problems are so hard to solve? In fact, most problems uh, related to social life and also related to interaction between material human world and the non-human world are very difficult to solve. So uh, the thing is that and these problems of such as problems related uh, to exchange between the human and non-human world. Uh, these are what in social policy research have been called wicked problems. Now, wicked problem is a concept that was formalized by Rittel and Weber, and this is the diagram that is based on their classic paper on wicked problems in social policy. And what they said was that a scientific approach cannot be trusted to solve problems of social policy because these are what they found were wicked problems, whereas science has developed to deal with what they call tame problems. And then they listed 10 features of societal problems that make them wicked, such as you can see in this diagram, such as every wicked problem is unique, and there's no clarity on how to even define the problem. There's no clear problem definition, and these problems are multi-causal, multi-scalar, interrelated, and there are multiple stakeholders that are affected by the problem and also the solutions. And these different categories of stakeholders have different agendas and different value systems. And these problems straddle disciplinary boundaries, organizational boundaries. So you can't even begin to understand them if you just stay within a silo of any particular disciplines, for instance, science or ecology. You have to go beyond it. And and you there are no right or wrong solutions to these wicked problems. You can make an argument that they're better or worse solutions, but there are no right and wrong solutions, and you're never sure that you have solved the problem or not. And then it takes a long, long time to even evaluate any solution to problems of social policy. Uh, and some examples of wicked problems are climate change, inequality, extremism, war, corruption, health and livelihood, migration and population. You can imagine. I mean, uh, these problems are very, very difficult to even understand and then to resolve. Uh, and an argument has been made that all environmental problems are actually wicked problems. Uh, if you can just take the example of climate change. This photograph that on this slide, I don't know how many of you remember, but way back in 2009, there's this small island nation of Maldives off the coast of India. You can see in the map that country has been marked out. In 2009, uh, the entire cabinet of the Maldives government met below water. They had a cabinet meeting underwater, and it was done to highlight the problem that this island is facing because of climate change. Uh, and the problem is that because of rising carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, sea levels are rising. And if the sea levels continue to rise at the current rate, it is possible that as much as 85% of the land area of Maldives will be underwater by the end of this century. So in 2009, the entire government of Maldives uh, held a cabinet meeting underwater to highlight the precarious nation of the entire nation of Maldives. Uh, in fact, uh, the government was looking to buy a new homeland and as an insurance policy against climate change. So when this island nation finally submerges in the Indian Ocean, the natives of Maldives have some place to resettle and build a new home for themselves. But this is not a problem of just one nation. Similar fate faces the Micronesian island nation of Kiribati in Central Pacific Ocean. They are also going underwater, and also if you may recall that even within the United States, many coastal communities are facing this problem. In fact, in my state of Georgia, Tybee Island is the first community that officially acknowledges the threat posed by a rising sea in a warmer climate. And just imagine trying to solve the problem of climate change, or even within climate change, trying to solve the problem of uh, natives of these lands that are going underwater, trying to find a homeland for them. I was doing a research in collaboration with a high school teacher who teaches high schools environmental science, and I posed this question to high school students, like what if these natives of Kiribati or Maldives want to seek refugee status, they want to resettle in the United States, and you can imagine students had a whole lot of views, and there was little consensus, and 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 so uh, refugee situation because of climate change is going to get worse in the coming decades, and all the nations of the world are aware of it, but they are not able to come together to even articulate uh, how to define this problem and how to go about solving it. And so, and furthermore, I mean, uh, climate change is a wicked, in fact, a super wicked problem for many, many reasons. Because, for instance, there is no one definition of climate change, and you can't know when you've solved a problem under the climate change umbrella. Uh, and solutions to climate change are expected to generate unexpected consequences over time, making it even difficult to measure the effectiveness. And every solution we deploy will have irreversible consequences. Uh, like, for example, some policymakers are considering the considering bioenergy or carbon capture or sequestration technologies to be a viable mitigation strategy. But to deploy it, we'll have to clear large tracts of land, fertilize them, even and that will have an impact on food security and a whole lot of other consequences to the neighboring communities. Uh, so these will generate some create more layers of problems to deal with. So climate change uh, is a super wicked problem. In fact, all uh, environmental problems are wicked problems. All right. So uh, now it's not that scientific community does not realize that they have to do something different. That that these all these environmental problems that are have been cropping up for the last century or so. These problems have forced ecologists and other environmental scientists to realize that staying within one discipline will not help them understanding these problems, let alone solving them. And this separation of natural and social world, this dualism of natural world and social world, does not work anymore. So scientists have now come to see nature not as something that exists out there as an objective reality, but rather as a social construction that is produced by human material and discursive practices. And in this new ecological approach, which is attempting to overcome this social nature dualism by investigating our world through a socio-ecological systems framework, in which it is assumed that human, political, cultural, religious, and economic institutions influence how nature works, and feedbacks from nature can influence institutional change, cultural change in codependent ways. And the field that a new field has emerged, which is called sustainability science. It's a very transdisciplinary field of research. Uh, and because of this paradigm shift. So scientists have realized that they in Anthropocene, in this new epoch, where you can see the imprint of human activity everywhere on the planet, you need a new approach. Uh, so I would want us to um, uh, read some relevant literature. I mean, the let's educate ourselves on wicked environmental problems. So part of the reading for this institute is that you will read chapters 1 to 3 of this book, Wicked Environmental Problems. And chapter 3 has 5 case studies of wicked environmental problems. It would be great if you can pick one case from this collection, and so that we can discuss its details and connections, implications for science education in the joint interactive session. All right, so we have some idea of what we mean by wicked problems. Now let's move on to the other two big topics of this presentation, and that's neoliberalism and globalization. So the question obviously arises that why talk of neoliberalism and globalization, especially in the context of wicked problems and science education. Uh, my assumption is that most of you would agree that uh, neoliberalism and globalization are two big forces that are currently very powerful in shaping our world. They're influencing every aspect of our society. Uh, and a case can also be made that neoliberalism and globalization are also making our world more wicked. Uh, for example, let's talk about the COVID pandemic. We are not out of it yet, so this is it's a very relevant uh, example to discuss, especially in the context of neoliberalism and globalization. Uh, a very interesting paper was published last year. It was basically a materialist analysis of the COVID pandemic by Nick Fox, and he traced the evolution of this pandemic. And he found that the ultimate of the cause of the pandemic is not the coronavirus particle, but the concentrated centers of populations, the global market, and the contemporary systems of international trade within which humans across the planet now live their lives. So that is this commodified interaction between humans and non-humans embedded in this globalized movement of goods and services and humans. That's which is fueled by and sustained by the global capitalism that caused the transmutation of a localized outbreak into a global pandemic. So Fox labeled COVID-19 as in fact, he labeled it as a epidemic assemblage because it comprises both human and non-human elements. Uh, so, I mean, uh, it it can be argued that COVID-19 assemblage, this complex of pharmaceutical industries, trade, hospital, patients, government, this assemblage emerged when the COVID virus jumped across species barrier to infect humans on a global scale. Now, this barrier crossing happened. Why did this happen? This barrier crossing happened because of commodified human and non-human non-human interactions, which are embedded in a global hyper capitalist social order. And this capitalist system spans the entire planet. It expropriates and commodifies all socio-ecological systems. Now, agreed. I mean, there's little clarity about many critical aspects of this COVID-19 assemblage, and also a lack of agreement about what would be the best ways to overcome it. For example, not only do we not know how would the seasonal changes impact the spread of the disease, we're still learning about it. It is also very difficult to predict how individuals and communities will respond to governmental efforts and regulations in different parts of the world. In my part of the world, we're already seeing how difficult it is to predict which how communities would respond to mask mandate or immunization drives. Further, this crisis poses unique ethical dilemmas as policymakers and laypersons alike wrestle with uh, how to how best to thread the needle between saving lives and saving livelihoods amidst inadequate public health infrastructure and lack of effective treatments. This is something that is glaringly visible in India in the past few months, where despite the surging pandemic, uh, state and local governments and even the federal government were very reluctant to issue lockdown because they were worried that uh, loss of livelihoods if they implement lockdowns. But of course, as we all know, that had catastrophic consequences for the country. So, since there is little clarity, different countries are trying a wide diversity of approaches to combat this pandemic. Thus, an amorphous, open-ended, constantly evolving, and binary busting uh, assemblage, network, uh, which comprises both nature and culture. So, nature and culture elements. So, nature culture assemblage, uh, like has emerged, which is what COVID-19 is, and that's why it can be fairly characterized as a quintessential wicked socio-ecological problem. And as lots the lots of literature supports both neoliberalism and globalizations have an enormous influence as it is on science education. Hence, it's very important for us to look at to understand how wicked problems, neoliberalism and globalization come together to impact science education and what can we do about it. So let's talk about neoliberalism. I won't go into details much, but let's. I will. I have some stuff for you to read. There's a website that my doctoral students and I uh, made last year. It's still a work in progress, and we continuing to develop it. But I would request you to go to this website. This is a website that we have developed for educators and to uh, help them understand how neoliberalism is influencing different aspects of the education system. So I would like you to read different topics on this website. And since it's a work in progress, it'd be great if you can give me feedback too, because we continue to to develop it. The introduction has been written by me, but the different topics are written by PhD students in our department. So, in addition to, to reading the, the content on this website, I'm going to ask you to analyze two case studies. One is I'll look at the commodification of intimacy on campuses in US and Canada. Another the other case study is basically it's on commodification of education. So I'm going to I would want you to watch this documentary, Starving the Beast, the Battle to Disrupt and Reform America's Public Universities. And it talks about how neoliberalism is influencing, transforming public higher education in North America. And you can watch this documentary for free at canopy.com. I think your institution would have membership to this website, which streams movies and documentaries. So take a look. If not, then we'll find some other ways to make this documentary available to you. So. And as regards, like just giving my take on neoliberalism, uh, I find that it's neither easy nor always fruitful to define neoliberalism. And this is because neoliberalism has been used to describe diverse kinds of socioeconomic and political projects, practices, and institutions in advanced capitalist societies. And over time, it has become a sort of a general descriptor for everything that is wrong with global capitalism. Thus, rather than attempting a single and simple definition, uh, I usually prefer to associate neoliberalism with a loosely connected set of ideas that can be articulated in diverse ways, depending on the theoretical perspective you have. If you're Marxist, you would define them in a different way. If you are a post-structuralist, that you would you will have a different articulation. However, if there's one thread that connects all the ideas usually associated with neoliberalism, it is the socio-political positioning of individualized market-based competition as the preferred governing principle for shaping human action in all areas of life, both at the individual as well as collective societal levels. Uh, so take a look at this website, and it will help you become more informed about neoliberalism. And then let's move on to globalization, for which I have some things for you to read and some case studies for you to work on. So for globalization, I would like you to read these two papers. Peter's papers focuses on areas of consensus and controversies, because globalization is again one of those words like neoliberalism, which has been associated with all sorts of current phenomena, and there's little clarity among scholars who do research in this area about what can be attached to associated with globalization, what cannot be associated. For me, I mean, I see globalization as this accelerated spread of free market-based capitalist style of production uh, over the entire planet, and especially in the past 3 decades, and this has led to an emergence of a world market, which means that capitalism and the ideology of free markets reigns over of much of the world, and and this has led to a tremendous increase in international trade and also mobility of investment capital, especially in the past 2 3 decades. And this expansion in trade and mobility of capital uh, is marked by this huge increase in speed of communication and transportation that has literally shrunk the world. This is sometimes referred to as space-time compression, and I find it a very important part of globalization. And also from a cultural perspective, globalization can also be seen as a dominant ideology of cultural convergence. The entire world is becoming one, in the sense diversity is declining, of diversity of cultures, and this ideology of cultural convergence is accompanied by corresponding economic, political, social, technological, and educational transformations. So you would read these two papers. Uh, the second paper by Jazz Da focuses on the impact of globalization on education. And then there are two case studies for you to analyze. One is what all has education for all done to different parts of the world. This education for all has been a campaign that has been going on for the last 2 decades. So it's just a good time for us to look at uh, what what good has come out of this. And education for all campaign is an example of globalization in the field of education. And the second case study is that I would want you to work on is the case of World Bank assistance to to spread education for all in one specific nation of Mali. Okay, all right. So let's move. So the question that emerges is that, so what kind of science education do we need if we wish to survive and possibly thrive in a wicked, neoliberal, globalized world? And when I think about this question, I come to a multiple part answer, and because I realize that the kind of education we need would be the kind of science education, sorry, that we would need would be, which should be transdisciplinary. Uh, as I mentioned earlier, and as we've been this, talking about, that wicked problems can rarely be addressed by conceptual or methodological tools and resources that are available in any single discipline. And we also discussed that there has been a paradigm shift in ecological and environmental sciences, that, that they are now realizing that they have to go beyond narrow scientific and discipline to even begin to understand sociological problems. And As a result, sustainability sciences emerge as a promising transdisciplinary field of research. So, my argument is that it is high time that school science follows the lead of laboratory science, the science that is done by scientists. And we should follow their lead and reconceptualize what is science for the purpose of preparing our students to live and thrive in the age of Anthropocene. Why should we stick with the old, dated approach of, of, of understanding what science is that has been left far behind by scientists themselves? So, following the new ecological paradigm, we should present an updated understanding of the world to our students by encouraging them to understand uh, world through a socio-ecological system paradigm, where they see socio-ecological systems as complex systems in which the social and ecological are not distinct, are not too distinct, those couple subsystems, but rather each is a component of a unified system with two interacting social and ecological dimensions. So it's not like there's one social subsystem and one ecological subsystem and they're interacting, but more, it's like there's a unified system which has interacting social and ecological dimensions. But this won't be enough, of course, because along with this approach, as we realize that wicked problems require transdisciplinary framework. So we also need to integrate social studies in the teaching of science. So we need a civic-minded science curricula for wicked problems. These curricula must contend explicitly, it's my belief that they must contend explicitly with the social, economic, and political discourses that shape the kind of possible responses available to citizens. And this kind of curricula would also give space to epistemological and ontological pluralism, in keeping with the current understanding in the philosophy of science, and also current practices in uh, uh, ecosystem management. So regarding ecosystem management, let me give you an interesting example. In Alaska, ecosystem managers are realizing that if they stay within a very disciplinary based approach of ecosystem management, then they cannot do a good job. And they also there's also an increasing awareness along with this awareness that discipline-based science does not work. There's an increasing appreciation of the indigenous knowledge that Alaskan natives possess. So you find that there's a new kind of ecosystem or natural resource management regime is emerging, which is giving, which includes a variety of arrangements for managing resources, and each arrangement is dominated by a different epistemology. Uh, and and for instance, if uh, in Alaska, wildfires are managed largely by agencies, but wildlife populations are co-managed by agencies and communities, with the balance of power between competing epistemologies varying from case to case. And for some other resources, such as gathering of berries and other country foods, local and traditional institutions, uh, they, they, their practices govern the the patterns of use. So if this is happening in science, then it becomes important to question uh, that why in science education we are so devoted to single mechanistic epistemology that is characterized by determinism, reductionism, and essentialism. Uh, as ecologists are realizing, this may work fine in the physical sciences, but perhaps not so much in environmental sciences. So, uh, my appeal would be to work towards a science education which is pluralist in its epistemological and as well as ontological orientations. Uh, so, in addition to science education that is transdisciplinary, I would also I would like I can I wish to make the case that if we want to do something meaningful to understand and uh, challenge ethical problems that the world is throwing at us, we need to have a science education that is ethically aware. Because transdisciplinary science alone may not be enough, and uh, as you may have noticed, that all wicked problems are also essentially ethical problems. That is, they involve making difficult ethical decisions regarding what is the right thing to do when multiple stakeholders press their case backed by different and contesting objectives, claims, and socio-cultural values. So take any social ecological problem, and then you'll find that different stakeholders have different priorities and different values and different uh, ethical framework with which they view the problem. So if our students, if we want to prepare our students who can even begin to understand these socio-ecological problems, we also have to uh, give them the tools, the, the kind of ethical literacy that would be needed for them to understand the ethical dimension of all socio-ecological issues. And further, if we want to prepare students to do something meaningful about wicked social ecological problems, then our science education needs to be rooted in praxis. That is, I mean, I'm of course here when I advocate of praxis, um, um, positioning teachers as transformative intellectuals, following Guru, who and these as transformative intellectuals, I see educators to extend boundaries of learning beyond textbooks and classroom into the society at large, and 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 these kind of educators uh, can orient students to critically and reflectively deliberate on their ethical commitments on issues related to our relations with the non-human world, and prepare them as critical thinkers and agents for positive socio-ecological change in whichever context they find themselves in. And that is what we need to do anything meaningful in this wicked world. So when we look at combine all these dimensions that I've been talking about, uh, what we what I'm actually arguing for is a science education that is phronetic. And here, what I'm saying is that on the whole, science has proved to be remarkably successful at developing universal, context independent, and analytic rationality based knowledge systems, which is what episteme is. So, if we go by this Aristotelian classification of knowledge, Science has been wonderful in developing episteme, that is, these analytical rationality-based knowledge systems. They have also been, science has also been excellent in offering practical, context-dependent, and instrumental rationality-guided technical solutions of problems or know-how, which Aristotle called techne, about the world. So, yes, knowledge, the science is wonderful at developing knowledge about the world. It's wonderful at developing technical know-how about the world. But where science has not done very well is in developing what Aristotle calls phronesis. That is practical wisdom that reveals itself in deciding what to do or what not to do once you're equipped with all this knowledge and technical know-how. And it so this kind of prudential judgment that we are called upon to exercise on these ambiguous circumstances, so that we can act with a view for the common good. That's the kind of practical wisdom that is needed um, uh, if we want to do anything meaningful about wicked problems. Because these wicked problems are marked by these value-laden moral predicaments that are impervious to both episteme and techne. These, you can't solve these moral issues, ethical issues, by appeal to knowledge or technical know-how. So, if we want to do anything meaningful, we have to position phronesis as a primary end goal of science, the development of this practical wisdom about, okay, what to do with all this knowledge and know-how to to work towards the common public good. So such a phronetic science education would be transdisciplinary as well as ethically informed. And by balancing instrumental rationality with value rationality, it will be a science education that is directed more towards the public good rather than this capitalism fueled destruction of the planet. And so, of course, when I talk of phronesis, I'm not arguing for a quick fix, because students, I guess, will need several years of sustained exposure to transdisciplinary practices and also ethically informed action before they can develop this practical wisdom, this phronesis that I'm talking about. And so, phronesis cannot be viewed in instrumental rational terms as a resource, like you pick from the shelf and read and sort of manual, and then that will tell you what should be done in any ethically fraught, complex, wicked situation. It's not a useful knowledge that can be purpose that can be deployed in a very output-oriented way. Rather, it's a sort of a habituated disposition that is cultivated over time, and, and that you cultivate when you repeatedly face ethically complex situations filled with ambiguity and uncertainty, where no amount of knowledge can tell a person exactly what needs to be done to take an ethically just action. So when students are exposed to these situations again and again, of this phronesis or this practical wisdom will develop as a sort of a disposition towards the world. So this is a kind of indirect knowing that is needed to inculcate phronesis, and that will happen through praxis over time. And it can be best organized in school settings through sustained exposure of students to the challenges of understanding and acting on wicked problems. So that's my argument. And there's a small paper that I published last year that I would want you to read, and where I present my argument more fully. Well, so that's about all for this presentation, but and I look forward to interacting with you, learning with you when we meet in our interactive session. And that's all. Okay. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. Bye bye.